Israel is at the forefront of the fintech innovation scene. Big shots like MasterCard, Visa, AmTrust are represented in the so-called Silicon Valley. In order to understand why Israel is such a big player in the fintech field, we have the chance to talk to Omry Ben David. Omry is partner with Viola Ventures, one of the leading Israeli tech funds with a remarkable portfolio and interesting exits. Omry, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
What are the financial companies looking for in Israel?
Yeah, so first maybe we start with some stats, okay? So Israel has 6,500 startups that are operating here on a daily basis, with 1,000 of them are being formed on an annual basis, so new startups. Of them, $6 billion of new investments are coming into Israel on an annual basis. About 15%, or 1 billion, are for fintech startups. And I think the important thing to note is that Israel, despite being a country of only 9 million people, has been able to produce what we call global category leaders, i.e. fintech companies that are serving customers globally. If you take into example Payoneer, which is one of our portfolio companies that is providing cross-border payments in more than 150 countries. Now, the reason that Israel has been so appealing, I would say there are four types of things. One, first and foremost, is the entrepreneurial culture in the Israeli ecosystem. So for an Israeli, innovation is almost a survival mode in terms of making an impact using technology that's going to impact the world on a global basis. Failure in Israel is an option, i.e. if path A doesn't work.
It's even a positive asset, right?
Correct. So if path A doesn't work, path B may be the one that they'll go through, and they'll run through walls to make it happen. And third, and maybe the most important thing, is that the Israeli entrepreneur is very agile in identifying new areas or new market needs. So for example, if I was an engineer at the Israeli Defense Forces dealing with cyber, I can take the same artificial intelligence, machine learning attributes and go and take them into efficient customer acquisition cost, or of course doing underwriting in fintech. So that's the number one reason. The number two reason is there are a lot of fintech legacy here. You have second timers that have sold successful companies like Actimize, like Check, like Fraud Sciences, and are now not only forming their next companies, but also serving as role models. The third thing, as you kind of mentioned, we have an ecosystem of both global and local banks. The local banks are very open for innovation, to run POCs, to embrace the startup scene, and the foreign banks are here to find scouting teams, engineering teams, and if you look at the likes of JP Morgan, Citibank, Barclays, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, they're all here. And the last reason is the funding ecosystem, people like ourselves that are providing the runway for those entrepreneurs. So this entire ecosystem is helping, of course, Israel become innovation hub.
You did not mention German banks.
Yeah, it's interesting. So German banks have a footprint in Israel, but less so in the R&D or sort of the tech innovation labs, more so on the classical investment banking, private wealth management, etc.
Before we discuss the future of banking system or financial system, tell us some words about Viola Ventures.
Sure. So Viola Ventures is part of the Viola Group. We're the largest tech-focused investment firm in Israel. We manage $3 billion of assets, and we've been around since 2000. So we're celebrating our 20th anniversary next year. Viola Ventures, where I'm a partner, is the early stage side of the house. We invest in early stage companies, typically seed A, occasionally the B rounds, and we do so across different verticals. So we do fintech, of course, we do enterprise, we do consumer, deep tech, marketplaces, etc. And as you mentioned earlier, we have a portfolio of more than 20 fintech companies within the group as well.
And what is your personal asset which you brought into this partnership?
Sure. So I've been here for 3 years. I came after spending a decade in New York. I went to Columbia Business School for my MBA, and then I was a tech banker at Goldman Sachs for about 9 years. And here my areas of expertise are fintech and enterprise.
So you're well placed to answer the $1 billion question. Are traditional banks innovative enough?
Yeah, so I think traditional financial institutions have a lot of assets that are working for them. So if you think about, first of all, they have a client base, their customers that have been with them for a long, long time. They have distribution networks, whether it's the branches, whether it's online or mobile, that have been with them. They have access to capital, right, which is important. Of course, they have their brand and reputation, which provide that trust that is so important in the fintech landscape. And last but not least, they have the regulatory infrastructure, right, the licensing in place, etc. And if you go back about 10 years ago for the financial crisis of 2008, that's where really the fintech sort of started. And back in the day, it was really an arms race between startups and the financial institutions. Really, it was the theme of either you disrupt or you get disrupted. I think if you fast forward to today, what we see is a phenomena we call fintegration, which is basically each side of the equation is bringing their own assets. I mentioned the assets of the traditional financial institution, but you have the assets of the startup in terms of innovation, agility, accelerated time to market, and together with that integration, you manage to create more and more innovation within financial institutions.
So what kind of disruptions are you expecting in the near future?
So I see two very large forces that are currently disrupting the traditional financial institutions. One is the challenger banks. Think about N26 or Monzo. They started with providing, a simple deposit account or a checking account, and they're now evolving into savings, into credit cards, into lending, into asset management. And we've seen examples of traditional banks like Goldman Sachs that is launching their own challenger bank, like Marcus, for example. The second force I see is the tech giants. Amazon and Apple have high aspirations to become more and more financial institutions. And what I tell traditional financial institutions is it's not enough to have an innovation team within your organization. You have to own it and really embrace it. You have to have the right budget, human capital resources, and of course the cultural mindset to embrace innovation and move forward.
One of the big issues is Bitcoin, of course. And I saw a tweet by US President Trump which shows that he actually is not a big fan of Bitcoin. Tell me, how would you convince him with a tweet that he's not right?
Yeah, so I think the Bitcoin was just an entry point into the cryptocurrency landscape. And by the way, I don't blame him or the regulators for giving some scrutiny on this. At the end of the day, it's a coin without much of a real intrinsic value. And of course, people can abuse the anonymity for criminals, for crimes and money laundering, etc. But I think digital assets have a lot of merit. If you think about the ability to a seamless transfer of value between one party to the next, that can have a lot of implications on payments, remittance, e-commerce, assets that have been illiquid, and you can create liquidity platforms in them. So I think with the right regulatory framework, I think we're going to see much more digital assets emerging and being a part of our life.
Anyway, Israel goes ahead with and is considering a fast track for licensing fintech projects. Would you recommend such a fast track also for other countries?
Yeah, I think the regulator's job is not to impede innovation, but to embrace and facilitate it. So I would recommend any regulator globally to embrace it and not come, in retrospect and put scrutiny on it, but have those initiatives upfront to enable fintechers to be more innovative and come to market much quicker. So absolutely, if with the right framework, I would encourage any regulatory body to assist with innovation and not impede it.
So from the viewpoint of consumers, what does banking look like in the near future?
Yeah, so I think on the traditional banks, you're going to see services that are much more consumer oriented. You're going to see much personalization. You're going to see much more customer engagement. From another standpoint is you're going to see consolidation either between the challenger banks themselves, or you're going to see the big banks acquiring challenger banks to have that access to maybe a younger market, a younger crowd, and this user interface. You're going to see as a consumer much more digital assets that you can use on a daily basis. And as a consumer, you're going to find that Apple and Amazon and others are going to be much more a financial institution for you than they have been historically.
So consumers have to adapt to the new environment.
For sure. And I think it will come as a sort of a natural place, especially with the millennial workforce and other younger generations.
Omry, this was a brilliant overview of the challenges of the fintech environment ahead. Thanks very much for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
And now back to Frankfurt from Herzliya, north of Tel Aviv.